The funeral hall was full, but the silence weighed more heavily than any words. The scent of flowers was already beginning to mingle with the candle wax, and each breath seemed to drag away the pain that hung in the air. Sitting in the front row, a black veil partially hiding her face, was she, the widow. Her trembling hands clutched a worn rosary, as if faith were the only thing keeping her from collapsing completely. Her eyes fixed on the coffin reflected more than just sadness. There was something else there, an emptiness that went beyond loss. It was as if her heart knew this was not just the end of a life, but also the end of an illusion. Behind her, the whispers began, low, curious, malicious voices. Did she know? You can't hide it for so long. She didn't understand. She didn't yet know what she was about to hear, but she felt the weight of their gazes on her back, like invisible knives. Her world was already shattered by grief, but there was something worse yet to come. Have you ever imagined suffering the greatest loss of your life, and, in the same instant, discovering that all the love you believed you had was a lie? The wake, which was supposed to be just a moment of farewell, would become the stage for a revelation capable of destroying everything she believed about herself, about her husband, and about the life she built with him. Her name was Helena. At 58, life had left its deep scars on her, not only the wrinkles on her tired face, but also the hunched posture of someone who carried the weight of an entire family on her shoulders. Helena was never a woman of grand material dreams. She grew up in the countryside, the daughter of farmers, accustomed to living on a shoestring. She married young, at 21, when she met Roberto, a serious, hard-working man who made her believe in promises of stability and eternal love. He wasn't Prince Charming, but for Helena, he was enough. When they married, she gave up the teaching degree she'd dreamed of completing. The family needs you at home, he said, and she agreed. Helena believed that caring for the home, her children, and her husband was her mission, and so it went for decades. She was the one who woke up early to make coffee, even after sleepless nights. She was the one who spent hours sewing clothes for her children when money wasn't enough to buy new ones. She was the one who held back tears when she wanted to cry, just so as not to worry her family. Life was never easy, but Helena was proud of what she had built. Each wedding anniversary was celebrated with simplicity, a cake she baked herself, an impromptu dinner, a smile from him as he said, "You are my life partner." These words were enough to reassure her she was on the right path. There were times when he arrived late, claiming work or unavoidable commitments. Helena, even with a heavy heart, never insisted on asking too many questions. If he said it, it's because it's true, she repeated to herself, choosing trust over doubt. After all, she wasn't a woman for confrontation. And so, year after year, Helena shaped her life around him. When her children grew up and left home, she remained by Roberto's side, believing that, finally, they would have more time for themselves. She imagined short trips, quiet afternoons of conversation, perhaps even fulfilling the long-delayed dream of finishing her studies. But that future never came. A sudden illness took Roberto, leaving Helena a widow overnight. The loss was devastating. Her husband, her companion of nearly 4 decades, simply disappeared, and with him all the certainties she had about the future. However, what Helena didn't yet know was that her pain was only beginning. Mourning his death would be only the first layer of a much deeper wound. The blind trust she had maintained throughout her life was about to become her greatest weakness and, also, her greatest discovery. Helena's mornings followed an almost sacred ritual. She always woke before sunrise, even after her children had left the house. The first sound of the day was the kettle on the stove, while the smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen. Helena always said that having coffee ready before Roberto woke up was her way of showing love. Roberto would enter the kitchen with slow steps, still drowsy, and she would already have the table set, homemade bread, fruit, sometimes a simple cake she'd baked the night before. He rarely thanked her in words, but a nod was enough for Helena to believe she was doing her job well. After breakfast, she took care of the house. The entire day was dedicated to keeping every corner in order, as if organization were proof of how much she loved that home. Sometimes, while hanging clothes on the line, she remembered when her little children would run around the yard. Now, the house seemed too big, too quiet. In the afternoons, Roberto would say he had work things to take care of. He was a driver for a small company, making deliveries and short trips. He often arrived late, close to dinner time. Helena always waited for him. She set the table, heated the food, and had the plate ready for when he walked in the door. There were times when she found it strange. The strange scent on his shirt, his haste to turn off his cell phone when she entered the room, the distant glances while they ate dinner. But Helena stifled her suspicions. In her heart, she preferred to believe it was all due to fatigue. He's always been a man of his word, she told herself, repeating it like a mantra. I never lacked for anything. He never failed to provide for the family. On weekends, he even tried to show some affection. He took Helena to Mass, insisted on sitting next to her on the church pew. Sometimes, they walked together in the square after Mass, hand in hand, like two young lovers. In those moments, Helena forgot all her doubts. She convinced herself that her husband truly was her safe haven. But the truth is, there was a loneliness hidden behind this routine. She dreamed of talking more, of sharing feelings, of hearing from him something beyond short phrases and veiled orders. Yet, she settled for scraps. After all, she believed this was the fate of devoted wives, to love in silence, endure in silence, live in silence. What she didn't know was that this well-established routine was about to fall apart. That every seemingly innocent detail, the delays, the strange phone calls, the perfume that wasn't hers was part of a parallel life that would only be revealed when it was too late. To Helena, the days before Roberto's death seemed normal. But looking back, they would be remembered as the prologue to her greatest pain. The cemetery was shrouded in an eerie silence, as if even the wind respected the grief that hung over the place. Helena walked slowly behind the coffin, supported by her eldest son's arm. Her body felt too heavy, her legs too weak to support the reality crushing her. When they reached the grave, she took a deep breath, trying to find strength in the rosary beads she still clutched between her fingers. The priest began to chant the last words, while the people around her approached, laying flowers, whispering condolences. Helena simply stared down, tears streaming silently. It was then that something shattered the farewell atmosphere. A murmur at the back of the group drew attention. People turned, making room. Helena looked up and saw a woman she didn't recognize. She was also wearing black, but she didn't have the typical expression of someone coming to pay respects. She walked with her head held high, accompanied by two teenagers who held her hands firmly. Helena's heart raced. Their presence made no sense. She looked around, searching for answers in her relative's eyes, but found only surprise and discomfort. The woman stood before her, firm, staring into her eyes. The teenagers, visibly shaken, stared at the ground. And then, the words fell like knives. He wasn't just your husband, he was also our father. For a moment, Helena thought she'd heard wrong. She felt the ground trembled beneath her feet. The son with her widened his eyes, unable to react. What do you mean? Helena whispered, her voice breaking. The woman repeated, more firmly, now holding the teenager's shoulders. These are his children, our children, and I was part of his life too. A deathly silence fell over the cemetery. People began to exchange glances, some covering their mouths in shock, others murmuring among themselves. Helena felt her entire body tremble. She tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't come out. The tears that had once been tears of grief now burned like fire on her face. Her heart felt like it was about to burst. Her eldest son stepped forward, confused. That's a lie. It can't be true. But the woman handed him a crumpled photograph. It was Roberto, smiling, hugging the teenagers in front of a simple house. Irrefutable proof. Helena recoiled, as if struck in the chest. Her legs felt weak, needing support. She felt as if her whole world had collapsed before her. The scene, in the middle of a funeral, transformed her grief into public humiliation. The man she mourned, her partner of nearly 40 years, had just been stripped bare before everyone. It wasn't enough to bury him that day. She also needed to bury the image she had of him, the life she believed she had built, the love that was now nothing but a lie. As the earth began to cover the coffin, Helena no longer wept over just a death. She wept over the betrayal revealed at the cruelest possible moment, and silently, a question echoed in her mind, like a stifled cry. Who, after all, was the man who slept beside me all these years? Night fell heavily on Helena's house. After the funeral, relatives slowly left, leaving behind quick hugs, pitying glances, and empty promises of call me if you need anything. But no one stayed. The silence that felt like a suffocating scream. Helena walked through the door slowly, still dressed in black, her face wet with unstoppable tears. Every object in the house seemed to mock her. His coat hanging on the back of the door, his favorite cup on the sink, the chair he usually sat in after work. Everything was there. Everything except him and, worse, except the truth. He dropped his bag on the floor and went straight to the bedroom. He sat on the edge of the bed, but soon sank to his knees, pulling out the nightstand drawers. He pulled out old photos, yellowed birthday letters, mementos from a lifetime ago. He scattered them all over the floor, trying to find in the images a man who might never have existed. I was a fool, an idiot, ... she murmured, her face covered with her hands. The scenes from the cemetery came back to her like repeated stab wounds. The other woman's face, firm, the teenagers beside her, the photo in her son's hands, and, above all, the phrase that kept echoing, "He was our father too." Helena felt ashamed, not only of the betrayal, but of the public humiliation. Everyone at the funeral now knew the lie she'd lived. It was as if the entire town had laughed at her in silence, as she spent years defending a man who led a double life. The following days were even worse. She barely left her room. The phone rang, but she didn't answer. Her children tried to talk, but she couldn't look them in the eye. How can I face you? How can I demand respect when I myself have lived a life of illusion? She thought. At night, lying alone, she relived every detail of her years of marriage, his voice saying, "I'm in a meeting," the clothes that came back smelling different, the averted glances. Everything was there, every clue, but she had chosen not to see. "I didn't just lose a husband, I lost my dignity. I lost who I was," she said quietly, staring at the dark ceiling. Helena began to withdraw from everyone. She avoided the neighborhood, avoided the church, even avoided her own children. She didn't want questions, didn't want advice. The grief was already unbearable, but the betrayal turned the pain into something corrosive, a wound that wouldn't heal. She found herself facing an abyss: continue living in the silence of shame or find the strength to seek answers. But, at that moment, there was still no strength, only falling. What Helena didn't know was that, even broken, even humiliated, she was just steps away from discovering something even more devastating and, at the same time, liberating. The house still smelled of him. It was a subtle perfume, mixed with the fabric softener from the shirts lined up in the closet. Helena entered as if stepping into a place both sacred and profane. The room seemed intact, untouched, as if any gesture from her could dismantle the last shred of normalcy that remained. But there was no normalcy left, only questions and, the worst of them, what else had he hidden? She turned on the nightstand lamp and pulled out the drawer. Old photos, a gold pen, garage receipts, loose change, nothing. At the bottom rested a brown-covered diary, its spine already frayed with age. Helena leafed through it. Phone numbers, dates, appointment reminders, lunch with a client's signs. The pages seemed innocent, until a folded piece of paper fell to the floor. She picked it up carefully. It was a bank statement, a different branch than the one she knew. Cardholder's name, Roberto Alves. Recurring deposit amount every 5th day. Recipient and Marina Duarte. Helena felt her stomach churn. The paper trembled in her hands. The last name meant nothing to her, but the pattern said everything. Day 5, every month, for years, he supported her. Then, her voice came out low, hoarse, almost a whisper. She leaned back against the bed to keep from falling. She took a deep breath, trying to stop her hand from shaking. She returned to the drawer. Behind the diary was a manila envelope. Inside, letters. Letters in his handwriting. The same handwriting he used to write birthday cards and notes on the refrigerator. Now, addressed to another woman. "Marina, our boys. Sorry I can't come on Sunday. I'll stop by tomorrow with what I promised." The tears fell silently, splashing onto the paper. She considered burning it all, not for revenge, but to erase it from her memory. But something inside her, the same thing that had remained silent for years now, said no. It said, "Open more." It said, "Watch until the end." At the bottom of the envelope was a black, unmarked flash drive. It took Helena a moment to recognize the object. My God, when was the last time she turned on a computer? She grabbed her grandson's laptop, which had been forgotten in the office since her last visit. It took a while to load. She almost gave up. The screen lit up, a folder labeled Documents. Click, another folder. Travel, another, Receipts, and one, lost among them, as if created in a hurry. Casa Azul. Helena hesitated. Her finger hovered over the mouse. She opened it. Photos. Him, the woman from the cemetery, and the two teenagers, in front of a small house with a low blue wall, a backyard with a jabuticaba tree, a photo of the gate with a sign reading home. Another, a Christmas photo, with simple lights in the background, everyone smiling. My God, while she, at home, lit 2 candles on the table for dinner the night before, waiting for him to return from his so-called extra shift. Helena's body arched as if a punch had landed in the pit of her stomach. It was all there, wide open, catalogued, dated, and in a subfolder, payments, PDFs with transfer receipts, some with the subject lines, monthly fee, school supplies, dentist, one with a larger amount and the description, down payment, Casa Azul. Helena brought her hands to her face, but not to cry, to breathe, to bear the weight of a truth so heavy it nearly took her breath away. The tears came later, a dry cry, without sobs, a cry unlike any before. It was a farewell cry to the woman she had been, until then, the obedient wife, the one who believed, the one who kept quiet, the one who waited. That, Helena decided, was no more. It wasn't just betrayal, she said to herself, with eerie calm. It was a lifetime of investing in silence. He closed his laptop and took out the flash drive. He tucked it into his coat pocket as if gathering a piece of his own heart. He then walked to the kitchen. The clock read 11:17 p.m. The house breathed a ceremonial silence. Helena opened the tall cabinet and pulled out a metal box where she kept family documents, certificates, the house deed, her children's vaccination records, mementos of a life she managed alone, like an invisible accountant of love. Inside, a folder she'd never seen before. Divided income. She opened it. Her name, her children's names, and a third set of papers, with the teenagers' names. It hurt to even read. Between the pages, a lawyer's stamp and a draft of a will that had never been notarized. In it, provisions for the maintenance of the second residence and minor children, amounts Helena could never have imagined. Roberto's signature, date, 3 years earlier. Helena's hands clenched into fists. Her face, once so delicate, now held a new firmness. After all, what fate awaits a betrayed and silent woman? What does the world expect of her? That she forgives in silence, that she accepts, that she swallows. Maybe so, but not that night, not anymore. I don't want the money, she said, staring at her own reflection in the dark window. I want my story back. The decision came like a snap. She took 2 steps, picked up the landline, and dialed her oldest son. 2, 3 rings. Mom, it's late. Did something happen? It did. Come here tomorrow at 8, and call your sister. We'll talk, and it'll be at Aunt Lourdes' house, where everyone likes to comment on other people's lives. Mom, better wait, you're very upset. I'm lucid. And I'm tired. She hung up, not out of rudeness, but out of self-preservation. If she continued, someone might try to dissuade her. She slept little, but she slept. A shallow sleep, interspersed with memories and scenes from a film she had now decided to direct. Sunday dawned with a dull, slightly chilly sky. Aunt Lourdes' house was on a corner, its gate always open, and people constantly coming in. Their life unfolded in unison, and, if a secret needed an audience, there was no better stage. When Helena arrived, some cousins were already in the backyard. Cups of coffee, bread and butter, the usual chatter about gas prices, yesterday's game. Their eyes fell on her, curious, calculating what to say without touching a raw nerve. She crossed the hallway without long greetings. There was a new firmness in her walk. A woman who had learned to live with her head down now walked with her chin held high. The children arrived soon after. The youngest, her eyes still puffy. The oldest, tense, worried. Aunt Lourdes came with her arms half open, a shy offer of a hug. Helena, Auntie, thank you for giving me the space. I need to speak, and I want everyone to hear. A respectful silence fell. They were relatives, but they were also public. Helena took a breath, took the flash drive from her pocket, and placed it on the table. And, from a fabric folder, she took out the papers, the letters, the statement. I lived 37 years with a man I loved. I buried that man 2 days ago, and yesterday I buried the illusion that he was only mine, she said, her voice firm, without a tremor. He had another family. You already know that. What perhaps no one here knows is that he supported this family with a house bought with money that wasn't spare. It was the money I needed when I asked him to fix the washing machine, and he said, wait another month, It was the money I made growing by counting coins at the market. Aunt Lourdes pressed her lips together. A cousin lowered her eyes. The eldest son took a deep breath, as if holding back tears. Helena continued, I'm not here to fight over anything. I don't want the house. I don't want the money. I want the truth. I want his name remembered as it truly was. Mom, we can resolve this in private, her daughter murmured. In private, that's how I lived. In private, that's how I was deceived. I want it in broad daylight. She opened the envelope and spread the letters out on the table. The pages slid out, revealing dates, promises, apologies. Then she laid the statements out in plain sight. No one touched them. It was as if the paper were burning. It was then that a voice came from the backyard door. A gust of wind brought the smell of the street with it. I didn't come to fight. Marina, the woman from the cemetery. Simpler, without the mourning, a dark blue dress, her hair tied up, alone. She entered cautiously, like someone asking permission in a church. I knew you were here, and that you were going to talk about me, she said, without irony. I was going to talk about him, Helena replied. I lived in fear of that day, afraid of you, of hurting you more than I already have. But I also lived in fear of my own silence. Those present looked at each other, uncertain. Aunt Lourdes stirred the sugar in her cup without drinking. Marina approached the table, saw the papers, recognized her own handwriting on 2 letters. She cleared her throat. He promised he'd tell me one day. I said I didn't want promises. I wanted dignity. I was deceived, to Donna Helena from the beginning. He said he was truly separated, that you two had nothing left. I believed him. I believed him because he convinced me the way you always did. And when I realized it, there were already 2 boys, a house, and a life built on sand. Helena listened. Her heart wanted to scream, but she held the reins. The second climax wasn't for anger to overflow. It was for the truth to fill every empty space left by the silence. I don't know if I believe it, she said honestly. I don't know if I believe myself either. Sometimes, Marina replied. But I brought what's mine to show you what my half of this lie was. She opened her purse and took out 2 folders, one with rent receipts from the early years, before the Blue House, the other with notes from Roberto written on napkins, hurriedly, promising I'll get it sorted soon, just a little longer, as soon as I can. Helena touched a folded napkin. She recognized the handwriting that had so often asked for bread at the bakery, written "Don't forget the beans" on the list on the refrigerator. Now, the same handwriting said to another woman, "Trust me." Helena's children stood still, as if any gesture could shatter what was still hanging by a thread. The eldest spoke, uncertain, and now, Helena said, raising her face again, now I decide who I am without him. She turned to Marina. There was no sweetness, but there was no hatred either. There was new ground under her feet. I'm not going after an inheritance. I'm not going after what he wanted to keep hidden. But I won't be the silent woman in the story. I'll tell anyone who will listen that I was deceived and that I survived. And you, if you want, can also tell who you were in that lie. Marina nodded, her eyes shining for a second. I want my children to not have to lie about who they were, about who they are. I didn't come to take his place. I never wanted to. I just, I never had a place. Helena took a breath. The word place opened a clearing within her. The second climax wasn't an outward explosion, it was an implosion of everything that had held together a life that didn't exist. And, from the dust, the architecture of a new woman began to emerge. So the truth is our place, she finally said. And each of us will build our own. She gathered up the papers, organized them by date, and put away the flash drive. She turned to her family. If anyone wants to see me as a poor thing, spare your gaze. I'm not. If they want to see me as guilty, too bad, I'm not. If they want to see me as a woman, whole, who suffered from silence and chose to speak, then they can stay. Aunt Lourdes, who had a sharp tongue for gossip, was the first to bow her head in respect. The cousin who had looked away now regarded Helena with something new, admiration. The children approached, still awkward, but present. Marina took a step back, ready to leave, but Helena stopped her with a simple gesture, a light hand on her arm. If you want, we can talk another day. Without an audience. I do, Marina replied. A gust of wind blew through the gate. The jabuticaba tree's leaves swayed. It wasn't reconciliation, nor friendship, nor instant forgiveness. It was something else, A break with a life in which Helena had always been a supporting character. There, in front of everyone, she took on the leading role. And the world, which had so often told her to be quiet, was forced to listen. On the way home, the sky was beginning to clear. There was no strong sun, no music of victory. There was an honest weariness and a strange lightness, like after a long storm. Helena unlocked the door, entered, and walked to the kitchen table. She made herself some coffee. She sat down. For the first time in many days, the silence didn't hurt. It was her own silence. She looked at the empty chair across the way and didn't feel like filling it with excuses. She picked up the journal she'd started the week before, when the fall seemed too deep, and wrote, "Today I discovered that the truth doesn't tear me away from myself. It's the lie that pulls me out of my place. And I, Helena, decided to return." She closed her notebook and put down her pen. She didn't know what the next conversations, the next battles, the next glances would be like, but she knew who would be in each of them, and sometimes that's all a woman needs to start over. The days after the confrontation at Aunt Lurdy's house were strangely silent. But it was no longer the silence of humiliation, nor the heavy silence of a fall. It was a different silence, firm, almost respectful. The neighborhood, which had previously whispered on street corners, now lowered its head when Helena passed. Some, out of shame for having said too much. Others, realizing there was no more room for Gosipamni, for the truth she herself had exposed. Helena felt a change within herself. It wasn't happiness, it would be too soon to speak of that, but it was also no longer despair. It was as if she were learning to walk again, only now with her own steps, without relying on a husband, on a wifely role, on a comfortable lie. On Monday morning, she got up early, made coffee just for herself. She set the table for one person, turned on the kitchen light, and sat down. The habit, once automatic, now had a different flavor. "I'm on my own," she thought, savoring the coffee slowly, as if rediscovering her own company. Her children visited her often. They tried to help her with documents, with the bureaucracy of the estate. Helena thanked them, but made it clear she didn't want to fight over the inheritance. She didn't want to discuss percentages, nor dispute houses or bills. "Whatever is rightfully ours, we accept. But I won't spend my days fighting over money tainted with lies." Deep down, she knew that fighting for the inheritance would mean continuing to live in Roberto's shadow. And that was a burden she didn't intend to carry. Instead, he began to look at what he could still build. He returned to church, not to hide, but to lift his head and walk among the people. The first few times were difficult. The stairs were heavy. But little by little, he realized that many viewed her with respect. Even the priest, in a homily, quoted without naming names, "The truth sets you free, even when it hurts." Helena also decided to spend her time doing things she'd never allowed herself before. She enrolled in an advanced sewing course at the neighborhood association. She'd always been skilled with the sewing machine, but she'd never imagined turning it into something bigger. Now, she felt she could create not just clothes, but a new life from what her hands were capable of making. The days still had their shadows. At night, he went to bed and sometimes missed someone by his side. Not exactly Roberto, but the feeling of not being alone. The pillow beside him remained untouched, and the memory came like a cut. But instead of crying as before, she took a deep breath and told herself, "I prefer honest solitude to the company of lies." Little by little, shame gave way to pride. Helena realized that, instead of being seen as the deceived woman, many now saw her as the woman who had the courage to face the truth. This difference changed everything. One day, she ran into Marina, the other woman, at the market. The encounter could have been awkward, but it wasn't. Marina greeted her with a shy wave, without getting too close. Helena returned the gesture. There was no friendship, but there was respect. They were both survivors of the same lie, and perhaps that was enough. Deep down, Helena knew her liberation didn't lie in forgiving Roberto. He was no longer there to listen, or give anything back. Her liberation lay in stopping living for what he left behind. Her past was marked by betrayal, but her future didn't have to be. One night, alone, in the kitchen, Helena opened the diary she had been keeping since the first days after her discovery. There, she put into words the decision that would shape her life from then on. For years, I was a woman who believed that love was silence, that loving was enduring. Today, I know that loving is also loving yourself, and I, finally, chose myself. She closed the diary, smiled slightly, and turned out the light. For the first time in a long time, she lay down without feeling the whole world weighed down on her shoulders. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Helen looked in the mirror that morning. Her face still bore the marks of sleepless nights, but her eyes held something different. They were no longer the lost eyes of a betrayed widow, nor the empty eyes of a humiliated woman. They were firm eyes of someone who had walked through fire and emerged on the other side. She fixed her hair, put on a subtle touch of lipstick, and smiled faintly, not because she was happy but because she was whole. And that was the greatest victory. For years, she believed her mission was to live for others: husband, children, home, family. She sacrificed herself in silence, believing that love was self. But you discovered in the cruelest way that when the lie falls apart, all that remains is you and yourself. And in that encounter, Helena discovered something she had never realized before: value. She learned that dignity lies not in being remembered as the perfect wife, but in refusing to carry the weight of a false life. She learned that honest solitude hurts less than lying company. And, above all, she learned that there is no shame in standing up, holding your head high, and saying, "I was deceived, but I will not remain silent." Betrayal destroyed a marriage, but it also paved the way for the birth of a new woman. Helena no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. She didn't need to fight for inheritance or recognition. She simply needed to live at peace with her own truth. And perhaps this is the message that resonates with us all. No matter how many years have passed, it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to choose. It's never too late to stop being the silent woman in the story and become the protagonist of your own life. Helena closed her diary that night with the phrase that would become her new motto: kindness is not weakness, silence is not love, and I will never again accept less than I deserve. And you? Have you ever felt deceived by someone who swore they were by your side? Have you ever lived in silence, enduring pain that only you knew? If you were in Helena's place, would you have the courage to face the truth, or would you prefer to continue living in illusion? Leave your opinion in the comments. Your voice may inspire another woman who currently lives in silence. And if this story touched your heart, follow our page to hear more real stories that prove pain can break you down, but it can also set you free.